On this Tuesday night, the demand for details about sweeping new powers. Reaction to the Federal Emergencies Act, what it's being used for and why.
Most of the truckers' bank accounts are pretty well empty right now anyway.
The legalities and the politics behind Ottawa's new emergency power.
24 hours in and there are more questions than answers.
The changes coming to travel rules, no more PCR tests required, what you need to know before your next departure. Plus, mixed messages from Moscow. Russia says it's pulling back some troops from Ukraine's border.
An invasion remains distinctly possible.
The U.S. president says the threat remains. And a golden performance. Team Canada breaks a record on the ice at the Winter Games.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is a lot to get to again tonight. There are changes coming for travelers, including an end to mandatory PCR tests for fully vaccinated people entering the country. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But we begin with the Emergencies Act. The federal government invoked it yesterday, the first time that's happened in Canada. It gives the government extraordinary powers and implies existing laws aren't enough to end the protests. In Ottawa, the protest is still going strong. The trucks are now lined up as close as they can get to Parliament Hill. And Ottawa's police chief, the person in charge of enforcing existing laws, has resigned. So what is the impact of all of this, including the government's plan to use the new powers to choke off funding to the protesters? Abigail Bimman has our top story tonight.
We are in control by our Lord and Savior, and He looks after us better than what our Parliament has been doing.
Parked right in front of Parliament, the Jonkers say they aren't worried about a frozen bank account.
Most of the truckers' bank accounts are pretty well empty right now anyway, so we don't put money into the banks anymore, and because we don't trust the banks anymore.
This is about following the money. This is about stopping the financing.
The government wants money laundering and terrorist financing rules to expand to cover crowdfunding platforms and payment service providers, which must register with FinTrack. Banks are asked to report on those involved in the blockades to CSIS and the RCMP and can freeze accounts with no court order.
That is a fairly serious consequence, impact these individuals for the rest of their lives. It's not like not being allowed to travel. These people won't be able to get loans, a mortgage, possibly a credit card if this is not handled correctly.
This is quite proportionate given the damage that these blockades are doing to people's lives.
But like all measures so far, it's not deterring hundreds of people camped out in the core. Some don't believe it.
Talking today about the State of Emergencies Act and the part about...
There is none.
Okay.
None. Because it's just another scare tactic.
I'd love for them to freeze my bank accounts because they're all in the minus right now because of this COVID.
Others, like Jimmy Sear, are just plain frustrated.
I'm not out here because I want to topple governments or to hurt anybody. I'm out here because I've been hurt so much by these mandates that I can't take it anymore.
Many Ottawa residents say they can't take all this anymore either.
Chief Peter Slowly and the Ottawa Police Services Board reached a mutually agreeable separation.
Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly out Tuesday. The interim leadership trying to convince the Police Services Board, the city, and beyond that things will now be under control.
But I'm confident that we've reached a turning point. We now have the resources and partners to bring a safe end to this occupation.
Ottawa police still won't say how many of the additional 1,800 resources they asked for they now have, nor would the interim police chief share any details about the plan Ottawa police promise they're working on to end things. But in answering board questions, he did answer the total number of charges laid for illegal assembly. It's 0. Donna?
Abigail Bimman on Parliament Hill tonight. Thanks. Now to the Emergencies Act. There are lots of questions about what evidence the government has to invoke it. Section 3 defines a national emergency as an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. There are checks and balances in place in the Act, plus legal thresholds that must be met. Those have yet to be spelled out by the government. David Akin is looking at the legal and political questions that need some answers. David?
Well, Donna, we have talked to several experts over the last 2 days, all of who say there is considerable doubt as to whether the government has legally met the threshold to declare an emergency.
So the government of Canada is essentially having to say that these protests threaten the government's ability to preserve the sovereignty, security, or territorial integrity of Canada, which I think is quite a significant thing to be claiming.
The Emergencies Act is not there to protect the Canadian economy, which is one of the things that the government has been talking about a lot.
And despite press conferences yesterday and again today with the Prime Minister and senior cabinet ministers, the government has yet to provide details or explain why it believes there is a national emergency and exactly what it will do about it.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act. 24 hours in, and there are more questions than answers.
I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker. The scope of these measures are time-limited and geographically targeted.
But does geographically targeted mean they apply only to downtown Ottawa or to the entire city? Is it one border crossing or all border crossings? One province or several? The Prime Minister did not say. Details like that and many more are the kind of thing that both MPs and senators will want before they vote to confirm the government's application of the Emergencies Act. By law, both chambers must begin debating this issue within the week. That debate will be followed by a vote, and the government must get a majority in both chambers. If it fails in either chamber, well, that's it. That's the end of the Emergency Act and the end of any special powers the government wants to exercise. Donna?
Okay, lots of steps still to come. David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. Well, the federal government is easing some testing and quarantine requirements for fully vaccinated travelers. Among the changes, those expensive and lengthy PCR tests will no longer be required before arriving in this country. Mike Armstrong is following this story for us. Mike, take us through these changes.
Well, Donna, travel's not opening up completely, but it is getting less complicated. First of all, pre-entry, travelers who are coming to Canada. You'll still need to show a negative COVID test, but as of February 28th, it'll no longer have to be a PCR test. A rapid antigen test administered by a lab technician will be accepted. That's a less expensive and quicker option for travelers. Now, upon arrival, the rules will be changing for vaccinated travelers. Right now, people have to take a test when they arrive in Canada by air. As of the end of the month, vaccinated travelers will only have to be tested if they're randomly selected. Also, they'll no longer have to quarantine while they're waiting for results. For unvaccinated travelers, there will be no change for now. They'll still have to be tested and still have to quarantine. The other big change is for children, 11 years old or younger who are not fully vaccinated. If traveling with vaccinated adults, they'll no longer have to quarantine before going back to school or daycare. Again, there's no change if they're traveling with unvaccinated adults.
These changes are possible, not only because we have passed the peak of Omicron, but because Canadians across the country have listened to the science and to experts.
It's about time.
Oh, I think it's a good thing. I traveled a couple of times since beginning of the pandemic, so it's always been a little bit harder since. But I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's better. It's going to be better. I think better,
Less rules?
Yeah, everybody follow the rules, less headache,
Now, the other part of this announcement is how the government quantifies the danger in traveling. It's no longer going to recommend avoiding all non-essential travel. But at the same time, it's warning Canadians to be careful. If you get sick while you're away, it can lead to expensive extensions of your stay and complications getting home. Donna?
Okay, Mike Armstrong, thank you. In Alberta, the blockade at the Coots border crossing is over. The protesters packed up and left this morning, one day after police made a series of arrests and seized a cache of weapons and ammunition. Heather Yourex-West has been covering this story since it began. Heather.
Donna, after 18 days, it's over, and protesters say it was the discovery of weapons here that brought this blockade to an end. They left town just after breakfast. A long line of tractors, trailers, and trucks.
It's too bad that we have to leave, but it was everybody did really their best and to get freedom for everybody in Canada. And it breaks our heart.
They'd vowed to go on blocking the border crossing until all COVID restrictions were lifted. But protest organizers say this changed things. A cache of weapons, including long guns, handguns, and body armor.
These weapons were brought by people who had the intent on causing harm.
13 people were arrested. Most now face charges of mischief and weapons possession. 3 have also been charged with conspiracy to commit murder.
Our message has been one of peace, peaceful protest, and to keep that message strong, we felt the best decision was to move out.
As protesters left Coots at a second protest camp near Milk River, police took names and collected information. Still under investigation, who brought the weapons to Coots and what was their intent? The Canadian Anti-Hate Network says one set of body armor seized by police displays the logo of a group suspected of promoting hate and violence.
We recognized immediately that the patches were the flag of a network called Diagolon. Basically, they're like a neo-fascist accelerationist militia.
Just before noon Tuesday, the Canadian Border Services Agency confirmed the Coots border crossing had reopened to cross-border traffic, a relief to many industries who move tens of millions of dollars worth of goods through here every day. Donna?
Heather Yourex-West near Milk River, Alberta tonight. Thanks, Heather. Another search at 2 former residential schools has confirmed what was suspected, signs of what are believed to be 54 unmarked graves. A Saskatchewan First Nation used ground-penetrating radar on the site northeast of Regina. Eric Sorensen reports on exactly what was found and a warning some of the details are disturbing.
Wall maps. 54 potential grave sites, adding to the hundreds discovered so far in Canada. Ground-penetrating radar made discoveries at 2 former residential schools, Fort Pelly and St. Philip's, which operated till the late 1960s. Ted Coutts was abused and among the first to speak out more than 30 years ago when Canadians would not listen.
We all knew that we would find grave sites.
Grave sites that he says cannot be ignored.
Every announcement of residential schools, residential grave sites, re-traumatizes us survivors.
In Canada, 139 residential schools have been identified. Most were in the West. In Saskatchewan, around 20 residential schools existed. The latest findings near the Manitoba border detected 42 graves at Fort Pelly Residential School, which preceded St. Philip's School, where another 12 graves have been found. And there may be more. Chief of the Coutts Nation says the discovery does not bring closure.
They're gone to school and they've never returned. All this has done is it's opened up the door for more questions.
The memories are agonizing, but must be remembered, say Indigenous leaders, for what they were.
These are crime scenes. That's what they are. We have to acknowledge that there has to be truth before reconciliation.
Every new discovery and story deserves to be told, the federal minister acknowledging this country's disgrace.
And frankly, to witness Canada's ongoing shame in the face of these findings. I believe you, and Canada believes you.
And then there is the Catholic Church, finally now working with Indigenous nations to uncover records and seek accountability.
And we are profoundly sorry for the role that Catholics played in the schools and the abuse that you suffered.
This educator doesn't fully trust government or the church.
They're not being forthcoming in bringing information forward and sharing documents. And even in the government, it's been a fight to get release of documents.
Next month, a delegation of Indigenous leaders from Canada will travel to the Vatican to meet with Pope Francis, a prelude to the Pope coming to this country at long last as a gesture of reconciliation. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
There is a 24-hour crisis line available for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of the residential school experience. The number is toll-free. You can speak in confidence. It's 1-800-721-0066. There is a lot on the minds of people in Atlantic Canada tonight. February 15th is the 40th anniversary of the Ocean Ranger disaster. The oil rig sank in the North Atlantic in a terrible storm. 84 people died. Most of them were from Newfoundland and Labrador. And tonight, there's a search underway for the crew of a Spanish fishing boat that sank east of St. John's. At least 10 people are known to have died. Rescue teams are battling rough seas looking for survivors. Ross Lord is following developments for us. Ross.
Donna, the Joint Rescue Coordination Center here in Halifax has deployed ships and aircraft to search for survivors. They include Cormorant search and rescue helicopters, a Hercules fixed-wing airplane, and a Coast Guard ship. A U.S. Coast Guard plane has also been sent out. 3 survivors from the 24-man crew were found by another Spanish fishing boat in a life raft. The rescue center says searchers have found some items, including life jackets, fishing gear, and 2 empty life rafts. Obstacles to the search include distance from shore and stormy conditions.
The weather was pretty intense in the area. Winds were southwest 40, seas were 5 meters plus, and of course it was night, which hampers searching. Today, the weather's moderated.
Searchers have better visibility, but waves are still more than 3 meters high. Spanish officials say the crew members include Spanish nationals and crew members from Ghana and Peru. The rescue center says its policy is to keep searching until there's no possibility of survivors. The center says the decision will be made tomorrow morning on scaling back the search. Donna?
All right, Ross, thank you. Mixed signals along the Russia-Ukraine border. Coming up, the American president's warning after the Kremlin claims it's pulling back some of its troops. The American President Joe Biden says he thinks a Russian invasion of Ukraine is still a distinct possibility. Despite claims by Russia, it is pulling back some of its troops.
And make no mistake, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. An attack against one NATO country is an attack against all of us.
Biden said today the U.S. is not seeking direct confrontation with Russia, but as Jackson Prosko reports, he says NATO is prepared and Russia will pay a steep price if it invades.
In an urgent push for diplomacy, the American president issued a stark warning and a plea for peace.
To the citizens of Russia, you are not our enemy. And I do not believe you want a bloody, destructive war against Ukraine.
It came on a day of more mixed messages from Russia. The Kremlin said it planned to pull back some troops from border areas. Russia's parliament requested Vladimir Putin recognize Russian-backed separatist regions in Ukraine as independent states. And after a meeting with the German chancellor, Putin made unsupported claims of genocide in Ukraine's Donbass region. Do we want war? Of course not, he said.
So far, we have not seen any sign of de-escalation on the ground.
True or not, analysts see hopeful signs in Russia's claims of a modest troop pullback.
I take it as a step back, and I take it as a hopeful sign, again, very cautiously, that he's prepared to step away and negotiate some of the issues.
Ukraine, now surrounded on 3 sides by 150,000 Russian troops, sees less reason for optimism. An apparent cyber attack hit several banks and government websites Tuesday, while back in Washington, the tone of the American president suggested serious concern that Putin may not be talked down.
Let there be no doubt. If Russia commits this breach by invading Ukraine, responsible nations around the world will not hesitate to respond.
Tonight, Ukraine has made an emergency request to NATO for supplies to prepare for what it calls large-scale crises affecting its civilian population. Among the items they're seeking, demining equipment, explosives detection equipment, and medical supplies, all ominous signs of what may be to come. Donna?
Jackson Prosko in Washington. Prince Andrew settles the lawsuit against him. Ahead, what he admitted to and what it means. Prince Andrew has reached an out-of-court settlement with the woman who accused him of sexually assaulting her when she was 17. It means he will avoid going to trial in New York, but it doesn't mean he's admitted any guilt. Our Redmond Shannon is in London tonight. Redmond, what is being made public about this settlement?
Donna, we don't know how much the settlement was for, but this outcome was always likelier than seeing the prince on trial. Tuesday's filing from lawyers representing Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew includes no admission of guilt on the Duke's behalf. He'd previously denied ever knowing her, but it does say he accepts that she has suffered, both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of the unfair public attacks. It also says he will make a substantial donation to Ms. Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights, and that he regrets his association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We may now never know the full extent of their friendship. Andrew had been scheduled to give a sworn statement to Giuffre's lawyers next month. Now he avoids that and a civil trial.
A court case in New York would have been unthinkable. It would have been an international cause célèbre. There would have been so much humiliation.
Even though these legal troubles are behind Andrew, his reputation is damaged. Already stripped of his military titles and royal patronages, his days as an active royal appear to be over. Donna?
Redmond Shannon in London tonight. Thank you. Skating to success next. Team Canada's golden nail-biter at the Winter Olympics. Team Canada is celebrating another gold medal, the second at these Winter Games. The women's speed skating trio won the team pursuit event and set a new Olympic record doing it. It was a nail-biter. Japan crashed into the wall on the final turn, giving Canada the gold. And Quebec's Max Perreault landed back on the podium for a second time in Beijing. He won bronze in big air snowboarding. Perreault hopes this will put an end to criticism of his gold medal win in the slopestyle event last week. His victory there was called into question after judges didn't dock him points for missing a board grab in his first run. The 27-year-old has been putting on quite a show at these games 3 years after being declared cancer-free. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Pelly Crossing in Yukon. There are beautiful spots all over this country. Please email us yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.